The first light of dawn was a shy, hesitant thing, painting the upper reaches of the glass atrium in hues of pale rose and lavender. Below, in the cavernous lobby, the artificial glow of recessed lights held court, casting a steady, unwavering illumination on the polished marble floors. Elara Vance moved through this manufactured brilliance, a quiet silhouette against the growing day. The hum she emitted was barely audible, a soft, tuneless melody that seemed to be breathed rather than sung, a private accompaniment to the rhythmic swish of her mop. The air, still cool from the night, carried the faint, clean scent of industrial-grade floor cleaner, a smell she had come to associate with new beginnings. Her mop, a well-worn but effective tool, glided across the pristine white marble, leaving a shimmering trail that quickly dried to an almost blinding sheen. Each sweep was deliberate, a testament to years of practice, ensuring no speck of dust, no stray footprint, marred the perfection. The grand lobby, an architectural marvel of glass, steel, and stone, was her domain for these pre-dawn hours. Its towering columns, intricate brass railings, and imposing main desk were all subject to her meticulous attention. She ran a gloved hand along the cool, smooth surface of a polished brass pillar, checking for any lingering smudges from the previous day's flurry. Satisfied, she moved on, her gaze already cataloging the next task. Soon, the first trickle of the day's human tide would begin. Already, the subtle shift in the building's atmospheric pressure, the faint thrum of the ventilation system kicking into higher gear, signaled the imminent arrival of the early birds. These were the dedicated, the ambitious, the ones who arrived before the official start, their briefcases clutched with purpose. They were the first to experience the lobby in its immaculate, Elara-polished state, though few, if any, ever registered the quiet force behind its pristine condition. They strode past her, their expensive shoes clicking a rapid staccato against the very floors she had just buffed, their eyes fixed on their destinations, their minds already engaged in the day's demanding schedule. Their crisp suits and tailored dresses seemed to radiate an aura of importance, a stark contrast to Elara's simple, practical uniform. She was a ghost in their periphery, an indispensable yet invisible cog in the grand machine. Elara paused her mopping near the bank of gleaming elevators. The metallic scent of ozone, a byproduct of their powerful machinery, was a constant presence here. She reached into her utility cart for a fresh, damp cloth. One by one, she methodically wiped down each elevator button, not just the glowing indicators but the entire panel, removing the invisible film of countless fingerprints, the lingering residue of hurried touches. It was a small detail, easily overlooked, yet in her mind it was crucial. These buttons were the first point of contact for many, a silent greeting to the day, and they deserved to be as clean and welcoming as the rest of the building. Her movements were precise, almost ritualistic, a quiet defiance against the chaos of the world outside. A young woman in a sharp navy suit, her phone already pressed to her ear, hurried towards the elevators. She paused momentarily, her eyes flicking over Elara, then quickly dismissed her, stepping into the first available lift without a word. Elara offered a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of quiet acknowledgement that went unnoticed. It was always like this. The important people, with their important calls and important meetings, moved through their world, propelled by an unseen urgency. Elara, with her quiet hum and diligent hands, was merely part of the background, a fixed element in the grand tableau of their daily ascent. But beneath her calm exterior, behind those observant eyes, Elara saw everything, registered every hurried glance, every dismissive wave, every unspoken assumption. The quiet hum of the morning held many secrets, and Elara, the silent observer, was privy to them all. The air in the lobby hummed with a different kind of energy, a taut anticipation that vibrated through the polished marble and hushed whispers. Early morning sunlight, usually a gentle balm, felt sharper, reflecting off the gleaming surfaces of a parade of luxury cars pulling up to the curb. Sleek black sedans and polished silver SUVs idled momentarily, their dark windows concealing the faces within, before disgorging a stream of impeccably dressed individuals. Briefcases of expensive leather gleamed, and the scent of designer cologne mingled with the faint aroma of fresh coffee from the executive lounge. These were not the usual daily commuters. These were the investors, the decision-makers, arriving for the pivotal meeting everyone had been buzzing about for weeks. Elara, quietly replenishing the hand soap in the executive washroom, heard the distinct cadence of their arrival. The soft thud of heavy car doors, the murmur of serious voices, the purposeful click of expensive shoes on the marble floor. She worked with her usual methodical grace, her movements economical and precise. A stray thought flitted through her mind. How much collective power, how many individual fortunes, were gathered under this one roof today? As she pushed her cleaning cart towards the main conference room, the double doors of which stood imposingly ajar, Mr. Harrison nearly collided with her. His usually neat hair was slightly disheveled, and his tie, typically perfectly knotted, was askew. His face was a mask of harried concentration, beads of perspiration clinging to his upper lip despite the cool air conditioning. His eyes, usually quick to offer a polite, if distracted, nod, darted past her without registering her presence. "Morning, Mr. Harrison," Elara offered softly, a habitual courtesy. He didn't even break stride, his MMPH, busy, very busy, a hurried exhalation as he practically jogged towards a cluster of men in dark suits, his hand outstretched in an anxious gesture of welcome. Elara watched him go, a faint, almost imperceptible sigh escaping her. It was a familiar pattern. In moments of high stress, the quiet staff became invisible, mere background elements in the grand drama unfolding around them. She didn't take offense. She understood the pressures he faced. Reaching the conference room's entrance, Elara paused. The room itself was immaculate, the long mahogany table gleaming under the recessed lights, water glasses sparkling beside pristine notepads. Yet on the floor, tucked partially under a plush armchair just outside the threshold, lay a forgotten item. It was a thick binder, its cover a rich forest green, embossed with the company logo. Its pages, she could see, were filled with graphs and dense text sticking out at odd angles, suggesting it had been opened in a rush and dropped. It looked important, crucial even, given the gravitas of the day. She bent down, her movements unhurried, and picked it up. The binder was weighty, substantial. As her fingers brushed the cover, a single word caught her eye, printed boldly at the bottom: proposal. A quiet hum from within the conference room indicated the meeting was about to begin, or perhaps already had. The thought of Mr. Harrison's frantic scramble, his almost collision, now made perfect sense. This binder was undoubtedly for him, or someone equally important, and its absence could cause significant distress. Elara clutched the binder, a silent guardian of forgotten information, and considered her next move. Elara hummed a soft, tuneless melody as she pushed her cleaning cart down the hushed corridor. The scent of lemon polish lingered in the air, a familiar comfort. Her gaze, accustomed to scanning for forgotten items and stray dust motes, landed on something out of place near the conference room door. It was a binder, a thick, leather-bound affair, lying innocently on the carpet, almost camouflaged against the dark pattern. She bent slowly, her joints protesting faintly with the motion, and picked it up. It wasn't just any binder. This one felt substantial, weighty, with a luxurious, slightly textured finish that spoke of importance. The corners were sharp, unmarred, suggesting it hadn't been there long. A small, embossed silver plaque on the front glinted, bearing the company's intricate logo and the words, Project Nightingale, Q3 Projections. Elara recognized the name. She'd overheard snippets of frantic conversations about it for weeks. This wasn't a forgotten lunch receipt. This was something critical. Her fingers, usually calloused from work, traced the smooth cover. She imagined the hurried steps, the frantic search that would surely ensue once its absence was noted. Her heart, ever empathetic, ached at the thought of someone's potential panic. It wasn't her job to return lost property, not officially, but a quiet sense of duty, ingrained deep within her, tugged at her. Such a vital item couldn't be left to chance. With the binder held carefully in one arm, she nudged the heavy conference room door open. The room was vast, an expanse of polished mahogany and high-backed leather chairs, bathed in the cool light filtering through the tall windows. A projector hummed softly from the ceiling, casting a still image of a complex graph onto the screen at the far end. There were no papers scattered, no coffee cups left behind, only the pristine readiness for an important gathering. Elara's gaze swept the imposing table, searching for the most appropriate spot. She wouldn't just leave it on a chair. That felt too casual for something so significant. Her eyes settled on the very center of the table, directly in front of the main presentation area. It was the most prominent position, impossible to miss. With a gentle, almost reverent motion, she placed the binder there, its quiet thud echoing slightly in the silence. The silver plaque caught the light, gleaming like a small beacon. It looked right, purposeful. She paused for a moment, a fleeting thought of the grand importance of such a document, and the high-powered individuals who would soon be poring over its contents. They would arrive, find it, and the meeting would proceed, none the wiser about the quiet intervention that had saved them a potential crisis. It was a satisfaction, small but profound, to know she had contributed, in her own unseen way, to the smooth running of the day. Turning, Elara retraced her steps, the soft squeak of her rubber-soled shoes the only sound. As the heavy door swung shut behind her, she was already mentally cataloging her next tasks. The executive washrooms, then the break room's perpetual battle against coffee stains. The binder, its importance, the impending meeting, it all faded into the background. Her world was one of cleanliness and order, and there was always more work to be done. The quiet hum of polite greetings had long since shattered, replaced by a storm of raised voices behind the executive boardroom's formidable oak door. Elara, guiding her cleaning cart softly along the hushed corridor, caught fractured glimpses of the dispute even through the dense timber. "Percentage of shares," a man's voice thundered, met by a sharp feminine riposte. "Control of the majority, Mr. Thompson. And that is non-negotiable." The very air seemed to vibrate with their escalating animosity. Elara paused, her hand hovering over the doorknob of a supply closet. She'd intended to fetch fresh polish, but the sheer intensity emanating from the boardroom made her hesitate. This was no mere meeting, it was a pitched battle. Through the narrow frosted pane set into the door, she glimpsed Mr. Harrison. His face was a canvas of profound anxiety, his usually immaculate hair now somewhat askew. He paced, hands wrung, his deferential nods doing little to calm the tempest raging around the polished mahogany table. He was clearly floundering, a conductor without an obedient orchestra. Just then, the door exploded open. Not by Mr. Harrison, but by a woman with a severe bob and an even more severe mien. Miss Albright, renowned for her cutting remarks and impeccably tailored suits, emerged, her gaze sweeping the pristine corridor with an almost predatory intent. Her expensive heels struck a furious staccato rhythm against the marble. "Mr. Harrison!" she barked, her voice slicing through the lingering din from the boardroom. "This is simply unacceptable." Mr. Harrison, startled, practically vaulted. "Miss Albright, is something amiss?" He scurried to her side, his posture instantly shrinking into anxious subservience. Miss Albright utterly disregarded Elara, who had instinctively receded a step, melting into the shadows cast by a large potted plant. The investor's perfectly manicured finger jabbed towards the expansive plate glass window beside the boardroom door. "This," she declared, her voice climbing to a pitch that threatened to splinter. "Look at this, Mr. Harrison. A smudge. A faint, barely perceptible smudge right here." She pinpointed a spot just above eye level. A minuscule, almost invisible mark Elara had somehow missed during her morning rounds. A hot flush crept up Elara's neck. She had been so meticulous. Yet Miss Albright, with her uncanny knack for unearthing flaws where none seemed to exist, had zeroed in on the solitary imperfection. "A smudge?" Mr. Harrison whispered, as if the word itself was too grand for such a minor infraction. He peered closer, squinting. I barely see it, Miss Albright." "That's precisely the point, Mr. Harrison." Ms. Albright's voice resonated with indignation. "This is a multi-million-dollar investment, a cornerstone of our portfolio, and you permit your building to be presented with such slovenliness. It speaks volumes about the utter disregard for detail, the general laxity that pervades this entire operation." Her eyes, sharp as obsidian shards, finally flicked towards Elara, a dismissive glance that lingered for only an instant before snapping back to Mr. Harrison. "Frankly, it's an embarrassment." Inside the boardroom, the argument reignited, a fresh torrent of shouts engulfing Mr. Harrison's stammered apologies. He looked utterly vanquished, trapped between the financial titans bickering within and Miss Albright's withering scorn without. Elara, witnessing the unfolding drama, felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. The smudge was her fault, undoubtedly, but the fury it unleashed seemed wildly disproportionate, a lightning rod for deeper, more significant troubles. The clatter of Miss Albright's heels echoed sharply down the polished corridor, a staccato rhythm that always seemed to precede her arrival, a harbinger of either impending critique or a particularly cutting comment. Elara, pushing her cleaning cart with its familiar squeak, had just reached the conference room door, a bucket of sudsy water sloshing gently within. She was about to enter, to address the lingering scent of stale coffee and forgotten ambition that permeated the space after a morning meeting, when a peal of sharp laughter erupted from inside. Miss Albright's voice, clear and carrying, cut through the residual mirth. Honestly, I sometimes wonder if our facilities management team even knows how to count to 10, let alone operate complex machinery. Another wave of appreciative chuckles rippled through the room. I mean, the way they leave things. It's a miracle they find their way to work each day, isn't it? Elara froze, her hand still resting on the cool metal of the door handle. The words, though not directed at her specifically, felt like a physical blow. A quiet sting, sharp and unexpected, pierced her composure. She wasn't just part of the facilities management team. She was the facilities management team, at least for this floor, and the implied incompetence, the casual dismissal of their intellect, settled heavily in her chest. She pictured the long hours, the meticulous attention to detail she gave to every surface, every discarded wrapper, every overflowing bin. She thought of the early mornings, the late nights, the quiet pride she took in ensuring the building shone, a testament to unseen effort. She could hear Miss Albright continuing, her voice laced with amusement. I told Mr. Henderson just yesterday, if you want something done right, you might as well do it yourself, because you certainly can't rely on them. More laughter, a deeper, more resonant sound this time, confirming the complicity of others in the room. Elara's grip tightened on the door handle. The initial shock gave way to a familiar ache, a quiet indignation that she had learned to carry with a stoic grace. She took a slow, deep breath, letting the cool air fill her lungs, a small, internal ritual she employed to recenter herself. Her eyes, usually soft and observant, hardened imperceptibly. She was not a woman to lash out, not one to engage in public confrontations. Her strength lay in her quiet dignity, in her unwavering resolve. She pushed the door open, the faint creak of the hinge momentarily drawing the room's attention. Miss Albright, mid-sentence, paused, a slight frown creasing her brow. Her eyes, sharp and dismissive, swept over Elara, then quickly moved on, as if the cleaning cart and the woman pushing it were merely an inconvenient blur in her peripheral vision. Elara, however, did not flinch. She met Miss Albright's gaze for a fleeting second, a silent, unreadable exchange passing between them. Then, with a quiet resolve that belied the sting in her heart, Elara moved into the room. She kept her head held high, her back straight, and began to collect the discarded coffee cups, each movement deliberate, each gesture imbued with a quiet defiance. The laughter had died down, replaced by the hushed rustle of papers and the low murmur of conversation. But Elara felt their eyes on her. She felt the weight of their judgment. But more importantly, she felt the unshakable truth of her own worth. The air in the opulent boardroom was thick with an unspoken animosity, a palpable tension that hummed beneath the drone of Mr. Harrison's nervous explanations. He dabbed at his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief, his voice a reedy counterpoint to Miss Albright's sharp, impatient interjections. We've considered all avenues, Miss Albright, truly. The financial projections, the market analysis, it all points to a necessary restructuring. Ms. Albright, perched regally at the head of the polished mahogany table, her eyes narrowed to slits, scoffed. Her silk scarf, a vibrant crimson, seemed to vibrate with her indignation. Necessary? What's necessary, Mr. Harrison, is for you to understand the gravity of this situation. This building, this entire enterprise, is teetering on the brink because of your mismanagement. She punctuated her words with a dismissive wave of her hand. the heavy gold bracelets on her wrist clinking. Her gaze swept over the room, settling for a moment on the quiet figure of Elara, who was meticulously wiping down the empty coffee cups near the side entrance. Elara, accustomed to being overlooked, continued her task, a faint smile playing on her lips. Mr. Harrison flinched, his shoulders hunching further. With respect, Miss Albright, the market shifts were unforeseen. We're doing our utmost to secure new investment. To streamline operations. Streamline? Ms. Albright's laugh was brittle, humorless. You're talking about stripping assets? Selling off pieces of a legacy? This isn't some corner deli, Mr. Harrison. This is a monument. Just as Mr. Harrison opened his mouth to offer another placating remark, a figure from the far end of the table rose. Mr. Davies, the company's stoic legal counsel, a man usually content to observe, cleared his throat with a dry, resonant sound that cut through the agitated murmurs. He held a crisp, aged document in his hand, its edges slightly yellowed. The unexpected interruption silenced the room more effectively than any gavel. All eyes turned to Mr. Davies. His usually impassive face held a rare, almost unsettling flicker of something akin to amusement. If I may interject, he began, his voice calm, steady, and entirely devoid of the emotional fervor that had permeated the meeting. While the discussion of the building's current operational status is certainly pertinent, I believe a crucial detail has been overlooked. A detail that significantly alters the very nature of this discussion. Albright tapped her manicured nail impatiently on the table. What detail, Mr. Davies? We're discussing insolvency, not the historical significance of the facade. Indeed, Mr. Davies replied, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces, momentarily lingering on Elara, who had paused her cleaning, her sponge forgotten in her hand. It pertains to the ownership of the building itself. He held up the document. This is a deed of sale, executed many years ago, under terms that were, shall we say, rather unique. He paused, letting the statement hang in the air, allowing a fresh wave of confusion to ripple through the room. Mr. Harrison frowned, his brow furrowed in bewilderment. Ownership? But the company we've always owned the building. Not entirely, Mr. Harrison, Mr. Davies corrected gently. This document clarifies that the true, singular owner of this building, as of nearly 2 decades ago, is actually in this very room. A collective gasp, a rustle of expensive suits, filled the sudden vacuum of silence. Every head swiveled, every pair of eyes scanned the faces assembled around the table. They searched for a figure of power, a shrewd investor, a shadowy corporate magnate. Miss Albright's eyes darted, clearly expecting to see some hitherto unannounced, formidable businessman rise from their midst. Mr. Harrison's jaw dropped. The air crackled with anticipation, a profound bewilderment, as everyone looked around, utterly perplexed, utterly unaware of who among them could possibly hold such an unexpected, pivotal secret. Who is it, Mr. Davies? Mr. Harrison's voice, a little too loud in the tense quiet, cracked with an eagerness that bordered on desperation. He wrung his hands, a nervous tic that had become more pronounced throughout the morning's increasingly fraught discussion. Miss Albright, poised with a pen over her notepad, merely raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, her expression a potent cocktail of impatience and self-importance. The rest of the room held its breath, a collective anticipation thrumming beneath the polished mahogany table. Mr. Davies, a man of deliberate movements, took a slow, sweeping gaze around the room. His eyes, usually crinkling at the corners with good humor, were serious, almost piercing. He let the silence stretch, a conductor savoring the pause before the crescendo. Then, his gaze settled, not on the impeccably dressed executives, nor the anxious Mr. Harrison, but on a quiet figure who had just slipped into the back of the room. Elara, having finished restocking the coffee station in the adjoining kitchenette, had re-entered the conference room to collect a forgotten tray of empty water glasses. She moved with an almost ethereal lightness, her presence often overlooked, like the gentle hum of the building's ventilation system. Her worn work clothes, a stark contrast to the tailored suits filling the room, seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. She was in the middle of stacking a water pitcher when Mr. Davies's arm extended, a single, unhesitating finger pointing directly at her. A complete, profound hush descended upon the room. It wasn't merely silence. It was an absence of sound, a vacuum where breath and thought seemed to cease. The soft whir of the projector, the faint rustle of papers, even the distant city murmur, all vanished. Every single head swiveled, every pair of eyes, from the incredulous to the utterly bewildered, fixed on Elara. Elara herself froze, the water pitcher clutched in her hands, her back momentarily turned to the room. She felt the weight of their collective gaze, a sudden, inexplicable pressure on her shoulders. Slowly she turned, her calm, observant eyes meeting Mr. Davies's steady gaze, then sweeping across the stunned faces of the executives. Her expression, usually a mask of gentle neutrality, registered a flicker of mild surprise, quickly replaced by her characteristic quiet composure. Miss Albright's pen clattered onto her notepad, the sound shockingly loud in the profound quiet. Her mouth, previously set in a thin line, gaped slightly, revealing a flash of white teeth. Her eyes, normally sharp and dismissive, were wide with disbelief, scanning Elara's unassuming figure, from her sensible shoes to her neatly pulled-back hair, searching for some logical explanation. Mr. Harrison, his face a pallid white, looked as though he might faint. His hands, which had been nervously twisting, now hung limp at his sides. He swallowed hard, a visible bob in his throat, his earlier eagerness replaced by a dawning horror. The air crackled with unspoken questions, with an almost tangible sense of absurdity. The owner of the building, the subject of weeks of intense speculation, the person holding the keys to their corporate future, was the quiet janitor standing by the back wall, holding a water pitcher. The revelation hung in the air, a shocking, undeniable truth. The air in the conference room, thick with Miss Albright's indignant pronouncements and Mr. Harrison's nervous apologies, suddenly seemed to thin. A quiet, almost imperceptible shift occurred as Elara Vance, until now a silent fixture in the periphery, stepped forward. Her movements were unhurried, graceful, a stark contrast to the agitated energy that had dominated the room. The muted gray of her simple janitorial uniform, usually a uniform of invisibility, seemed to catch the morning light filtering through the large windows, giving her an unexpected, gentle glow. Her gaze, clear and steady, met Miss Albright's, who was mid-sentence, her face flushed with pique. "There seems to be a misunderstanding," Elara said, her voice soft but resonating with an understated authority that hushed the room. Mr. Harrison, who had been wringing his hands, froze, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and a nascent apprehension. Ms. Albright, momentarily stunned by Elara's direct address, sputtered, "A misunderstanding? What could a cleaning staff possibly understand about our corporate acquisitions, young lady?" Her tone dripped with patronizing disdain, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, unsettled by Elara's unwavering composure. Elara offered a small, polite smile. "Perhaps more than you realize, Miss Albright." She turned slightly to Mr. Harrison, whose jaw had begun to slacken. "Mr. Harrison, you mentioned a new owner. You are quite right. I am that owner." A gasp escaped Miss Albright, loud enough to echo in the sudden silence. Mr. Harrison's eyes, already wide, seemed to bulge, and the color drained from his face, leaving him a pallid shade of disbelief. He looked between Elara, serene and poised, and Miss Albright, whose meticulously coiffed hair seemed to stiffen with shock. "You?" Ms. Albright finally managed, her voice cracking. "But that's preposterous! You work here! Fuck! You clean the toilets!" Elara's smile remained gentle, devoid of offense. "Indeed I do, and I do a very thorough job, if I may say so myself." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. "For years, I've worked multiple jobs, carefully saving every penny. I live simply, invest wisely, and always look for opportunities. When this building came up for sale quietly a few months ago, I saw my chance. It was a sound investment. The numbers made sense. The location is excellent, and the potential for growth is significant." She spoke with an unexpected eloquence, her explanation clear, concise, and utterly logical. Ms. Albright, typically so self-assured, was now a portrait of utter bewilderment, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly like a fish out of water. Her face, which had been contorted in anger, now cycled through shades of crimson and stark white. "I don't understand," Ms. Albright stammered, her gaze darting around the room as if searching for an escape or a hidden camera. This is a joke, isn't it? Some kind of elaborate prank?" Elara's eyes, kind but firm, met hers. No, Miss Albright, it is simply the culmination of hard work and foresight. I signed the papers last week. Your company, Miss Albright, will now be paying rent directly to me. Mr. Harrison, who had been leaning against the conference table, slowly slid down into a chair, his face a mask of profound astonishment. He stared at Elara, his previous anxiety replaced by a humbling realization. The quiet, unassuming woman he had barely acknowledged was, in fact, the one holding all the cards. Ms. Albright, however, was now stammering apologies, her arrogance replaced by a desperate, fumbling attempt to regain some semblance of decorum. The shift in power, gentle yet absolute, was palpable in the now utterly silent room. Elara's soft voice, sharp as a honed blade, sliced through the lingering tension with surgical precision, devoid of aggression. Her gaze swept the polished mahogany table, assessing each occupant. A pale, flustered Mr. Harrison, whose tie seemed suddenly constrictive, and Miss Albright, whose rigid posture and pursed lips broadcast deep annoyance. A faint, almost imperceptible smile, more reassuring than amused, touched Elara's lips. We seem to have strayed slightly, she began, her warm, honey-colored eyes scanning the faces. The air, thick with unspoken accusations and simmering resentments, visibly lightened under the unexpected gentleness of her tone. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, a nervous tick, and fixed his gaze intently on a water glass, avoiding hers. Miss Albright, conversely, met Elara's eyes with a defiant glare, a challenge implicit in her stare. And I believe, Elara continued, her voice gaining a quiet strength that belied her unassuming presence, that the path back to productive discussion begins with a very simple, yet profoundly important understanding. She paused, letting her words sink in, the only sound the distant hum of the building's ventilation. The ghosts of stale coffee and expensive cologne mingled faintly, punctuated by the clean, crisp scent of the lemon polish Elara had used that morning. Leaning slightly forward, her smooth, unadorned knuckles resting calmly on the table, she continued. It is my firm conviction that respect, true, unwavering respect for every single person in this room, and indeed for every person we encounter, is the most fundamental principle we must uphold. Not just for those with titles or perceived power, but for every individual who contributes, in their own unique way, to the collective whole. Ms. Albright shifted uncomfortably, a flush creeping up her neck. Her usual haughty self-assurance flickered, replaced by a momentary defensiveness. Mr. Harrison, meanwhile, looked up, his brow furrowed in thought, a dawning realization softening the anxious lines around his eyes. He seemed to grasp that Elara's observations weren't about recrimination, but about establishing a baseline of human decency. Without it, Elara's voice remained unwavering. Our efforts are fractured, our intentions misinterpreted, and our potential severely limited. A building, no matter how grand, is only as strong as its foundation. And in our interactions, that foundation is built on mutual respect. She allowed her words to hang in the air, a silent challenge to the unspoken hierarchies and judgments that had permeated the earlier discussion. Then, straightening, her smile returned, a gentle invitation lighting her eyes. So, she said, her voice a calm balm after the recent storm, I would be most grateful if we could now continue our meeting. Let us proceed with the important work that awaits us, but this time, with a renewed commitment. Let us treat every voice as equally valuable, every perspective as equally deserving of consideration, and every person as equally important. Her gaze, kind but resolute, rested on each individual, conveying an expectation both firm and benevolent. The unspoken command was clear. The previous tenor of the meeting was no longer acceptable. The choice was theirs, but the new standard had been unequivocally set.